Hi. I don't know most people in this room, and I don't really know your background, and I was told that I have to speak slowly, which is usually pretty difficult for me, so I'm going to do my best. First, you'll hear a lot of what you'll hear so far is a lot of words, smart contract, scalability, blockchain, Bitcoin, token, crypto, ICO, and I think a lot of people can tell you the definition of a lot of these terms, but really very few understand the meaning of these terms. I think the weakest thing about, so far, the ecosystem that's attempting to be developed is that most of the people, even many of the speakers at programs, don't really know very much about what they're talking about. And it's a very, very sad fact. One of the things that people, I know the language people use here is blockchain technology. So we've already been told that the blockchain technology is not very private, it's not very secure, the smart contracts have limited applications, and you can't scale it, okay? That's, I think, if you listen to some of the things that have been said so far, that's pretty much what you've heard. So now we sit back and here is, why are we all here? Okay, and why are we trying to do what we think we're going to do? Now, I've seen a lot of people very, very smart. They have their PhDs. I have a couple of PhDs myself. But, you know, at the end of the day, what people need to try and figure out how to do is how to build a business, not how to raise money, okay? We've already established that this is pretty easy to raise money, okay? But the question is anybody doing any useful with the money they're raising? And I would assume, I think that basically on the most part, you know, most people are doing useless things with the money that they've raised. So since people have already used coins and tokens, I see the script that I was given of words I'm not supposed to use, other people have used, so I guess I can use them myself. So, you know, I tend to like to say, you know, there's either Bitcoin or shitcoin. So pretty much, you can generally assume if it's not Bitcoin, it's probably a shitcoin. So some of you, I assume, since not everybody here is figuring out how to buy Bitcoin, you're trying to figure out how to not issue a shitcoin or how to not invest in a shitcoin. So maybe what I'll do is I'll give you a little guidance from my perspective, and then instead of hearing myself talk and you hearing me talk, maybe I'll give you an opportunity of having some of you ask questions so I can know what you want to hear and what you'd like to learn, you know, rather than me, you know, giving, you know, just talking, you know, stream of consciousness here. One is I think everyone should read the Satoshi paper and try and understand in depth the Satoshi paper, okay? The second thing is when I see a number of these applications that people are building, people who are building applications don't know anything about the market structure that they're attempting to, quote, disrupt, okay? I don't see anybody doing anything very disruptive at all outside of Bitcoin. So there is nothing very disruptive going on right now. And some of these use cases, I don't see anything disruptive about what anybody is talking about. Since we've begun how wonderful the internet is, and I think the internet is a great tool, I love using it, but really what we've seen is, if you look at how much wealth has been created because of the technology of the internet, you know, we basically have seen a period of very moderate economic growth worldwide since we've had this technology. So the question is, for a number of us, it's made our lives better. What most of the technology has been very good at is concentrating wealth. That's what it's been most effective at, is concentrating wealth. If you really take a look at the statistics of the improvement of the middle class, lower middle class, you know, in many parts of the developed world with the advances of technology, we have more comfortable lives, but we've had more comfortable lives mostly because we're borrowing a lot more money and going into debt, and we're becoming debt slaves in return for enjoying some of these comforts. So we have to think about why is the economy in such bad shape basically all over the world, and it has to be sustained by very creative policy on the part of central banks all over the world, whether it's quantitative easing, you know, whether it's capital controls, you know, whether it's with the ECB buying up almost all the corporate debt. You know, so ultimately every market in the world is so fragile that it has to be supported by governments in order to preserve the quality of the financial markets. So how do we think we're going to make a better world through, at least the thought process embedded in this technology? Right now, the top 1% controls about 50% of net worth in the world. Okay, the estimates are that the top 1% will own about 70 to 75% of the net worth in the world in the next 20 years. When we talk about like the application of what people talk about big data, what does big data mean? Big data means is that you give a lot of information about yourself, okay, and in return, other people make money off of it. Not you, other people. So that's what all these platforms, mega platforms are involved, is that basically there's, I express it in two ways, that either data is labor or that we now are basically inputs in people's to production functions. Only we're not compensated in part of the production functions. So how is it that we can maybe reorganize economic activity in a way that would create not only more wealth, but that might distribute it naturally better than we currently do today? So that comes about to where I see the application in blockchain, or the type of thinking that's driving blockchain, where the solution might not actually be blockchain, but might be some of the derivatives that we talked about earlier, about people who are trying to build decentralized, scalable platforms that might not end up being on the blockchain. Okay, for some of you who might not know it, blockchain is old technology. 1976, first blockchain company, Cipher Blockchaining. So if you have to think about why has a technology been around since 1976 and nobody's done anything interesting with it? So we have to think about what the limitations are, and I would assume most of the people working on platforms don't even understand the limitations of the technology that they're working on, because they just view it as tech. And when they look at the problem they're trying to solve, they don't understand what the problem is to begin with. All they hear is trustless intermediaries. I'm going to get rid of intermediaries and the world is going to be a better place. Okay? The question is that why does that intermediary exist, and why is your solution better, and why is it cheaper? Most people don't think about that. The buzzwords sound nice, and that seems to be sufficient, and there are enough stupid people writing checks that'll fund stupid ideas. So whether they'll actually produce a valuable business, that remains to be seen. So far, that's really not been the case, except for Bitcoin. So the way I like to see about what's the problem that we have and how thinking about a whole different framework for the economy, okay, is that what we have now is we have what's been the consequences of centralization. The consequences of centralization is that we have concentrated economic power, okay, which not only translates into concentrated economic power, it translates into concentrated political power, which then reinforces itself. So the question is how much, a lot of the outcomes that we have in the world have nothing to do with how valuable your input is into the production process. It mostly has to do with your bargaining power. So the question is how do we change bargaining power? Okay. We change bargaining power by going organizations that go vertical to horizontal. So how do we create horizontal structures where people basically have to negotiate with each other as peers, and where people are basically one person doesn't have significant bargaining advantage over somebody else. And also, so how do we not have people profit off information asymmetries? So when I take a look at how I think about this ecosystem, I think about it as how do we create structures that have us end up behaving more in cooperation with each other, okay, rather than in competition with each other. Most people in life, the things they enjoy most are the things they do that generally have them building consensus with people that they enjoy and sharing activities with people that they do. That's our relationships with our families and friends, and most of our relationships are basically peer-to-peer relationships. Okay? The only place we don't have a peer-to-peer relationship is in our job. Okay? And the question is that really necessary? Okay? In order for us to be productive, can we only be productive in an environment where where you work in an absence of peer-to-peer relationship? I would think that many of you that have ever worked for a company, you'd probably think if your boss didn't show up for a month, it would probably improve your productivity, not reduce your productivity. So most organizations that are really successful are successful because people are pretty good at organizing themselves, you know, in the absence of somebody instructing them what to do. You can't be productive organization if people are waiting for instructions from one or two people, because then that creates too many bottlenecks. So what is the opportunity that we have really in us being able to extract more value and have more bargaining power over other agents that we interact with, you know, in the world? And that's really a function of how we think about how we organize our activities. So I was, one of the people that influenced me when I was a student at University of Chicago was Ronald Coase. And I encourage you all to read some of Coase's work, especially the work, The Nature of the Firm. So Coase asked a question that most people didn't think about when they went into business. They said, why do firms exist? Most people just say firms exist, so there must be a good reason. So Coase hypothesized that firms exist to mitigate transaction costs. So he says we organize ourselves in a way that's the most efficient way to organize ourselves, in a way that we mitigate the cost associated with organizing ourselves amongst and between ourselves. So in a world, you know, where contract law is somewhat limited and a lot of regulation, where you have to lobby governments, building up scale and organizing yourself to big enough scale gave you bargaining power. So a lot of how we organize ourselves is a function of getting bargaining power over other third parties. We got to make sure that if we want to influence government, we got to be big. If we want to be able to get the best deal with our supply chain, we got to be big. If we want to make sure that we can make as much money off of our customer, we got to be big. So we all figure out how do we become big. Okay, not necessarily because being big means we create more value. It means of how the pie gets divided, we can take a larger share of the pie ourselves. So ultimately, the outcomes that we have in how prices are allocated and value is allocated really has significant amount to do with bargaining power. And so that's all I have left. Okay. So, you know, so if we organize ourselves in a way where now we have to cooperate with others, if we had a world out there where every one of you was a token, okay? Everyone a token in the sense that we token, because what's the most important capital in the world? Human capital. Okay, everyone in this room is the most valuable. If you look at, you know, the work that's done by Gary Becker shows that basically about, if you look at the value of companies, okay, and the value of a nation, the value of the nation, about 2/3 of it is human capital. So if you take a look at property, plant, equipment, those type of tangible assets, they're only a small percentage of the value creation process. The rest of the value creation process is us, okay, in the room. But the question is, how do we get allocate, who gets the benefit of it? Prior to really the beginning of this central banking and hyper leverage, basically we had usually the marketplace allocated value pretty decently. But once we were able to create significant amount of leverage, those that have a very preferred cost of capital end up extracting more value. So if you take a look at, like in the US, for example, the financial sector was about 4 to 6% of GDP prior to the deregulation that occurred in 77 through 1980. And now it's about 20–25% of GDP of profits to the financial sector. So it just so happens coincident to that is when savings evaporated for the middle class, okay, income stagnated for the middle class. So the question is, a lot of it has been just a basically redistribution of wealth. So other people are capturing the value of our human capital. So how do we recapture the value of our human capital? We can recapture it in a decentralized world. So, and right now, with the beginning of being able to think about decentralization, you know, is a world where we define the currency we want to use, and we design the organization that we think is appropriate for way to us interact with each other. So we can have a decentralized world if we do more in Bitcoin, amongst and between ourselves, if there's more mass adoption of Bitcoin, and also if we end up doing more in organizations where we end up having flat organizations, where we end up figuring out how we can cooperate with each other, and that we don't let people predate against us, that we don't get people to exploit our information. If you think about, if you withheld all your information from Facebook, okay, what do you think the value of Facebook's platform would be? It would be almost nothing. If you all organized yourself and said, I'm going to have a platform where I have this data, okay, and this data I'm going to put on this blockchain platform, okay? And the blockchain platform doesn't have access to my data. The data I'm keeping myself. So I keep control of the data, but what I do is I can give a platform governance over that data. So now you can create a platform where all the people who contribute to Facebook, they get to share in the market cap of Facebook, you know, rather than getting just some little bit of convenience associated with being able to chat with a few friends while the benefits are very significantly concentrated. So almost all these big platforms today, everyone is producing information, and the value of the platform is all the information you're all producing. The question is how do you get control of that information again, where you end up profiting off of it, and you determine who you're going to share it with, and if the person you're going to share it with is creating value for you. So you really have to think, if you really want to do something that's going to be transformative, you have to think about why the world is organized the way it is, and what would cause it to be different. Okay, like, you know, so I think people always refer to me, you know, I was an early investor in Uber and Airbnb. I can tell you my thought process behind those two platforms. And sorry, I ended up speaking much faster. I can't slow myself down, sorry. You know, my thought process in Airbnb and Uber and how I got my participation is very simple. Okay, I went to people, my lawyers, and many of my lawyers represent a lot of the VCs, and I told them once this first smartphone came out, I understood, because I'm trained in economics, I understand matching models. So once I understand matching models, I know wherever the government is, markets get perverted. So once the government intrudes on a market and intrudes on pricing in markets, okay, then capital is poorly allocated, and so the price that you observe is not a real market price, okay? It's an administered price, because the government is heavy-handed in it. In the United States right now, if you would take a look at data information, you know, I'm referring just to the United States, and I assume studies would be similar in many other countries. If you took a look at the price index for things that the government has nothing to do with, you see deflation. Okay, the only areas where we have inflation in the United States is in areas where the government is actively involved in. So if healthcare, education, okay, housing, okay, every sector where there's significant government involvement, we have inflation, okay, and in every sector where the government is minimally involved, we have deflation. Naturally, deflation is the natural occurrence in history, you know, and that's why I say Bitcoin is a deflationary currency. Bitcoin has it right. You know, so when I was looking at, once the matching models came out, and I started thinking about, okay, which of the type of durable goods are completely mispriced? So I immediately went to a couple of my lawyers with VC connections, and I said, two businesses people should do. One is somebody can use now the smartphone and create an app where they can match cars with people who need access to a car, because you never can get a taxi in New York when you need to get a taxi. And the hack licenses are very expensive because they put restrictions on how many they are. So if it's raining, forget about getting a taxi. If it's rush hour, forget about getting a taxi. You can only find it when you don't need it, and when you do need it, you can't find it. So I went to the company, and I actually laid out how you could arbitrage the law, and I went to my lawyers, and I said, this works, speak to your friends, somebody should do this. And I did that, and I came up with the idea about a year and a half before Uber existed. So, and Airbnb, the same thing. I did a lot of real estate development, so I knew that people owning real estate could arbitrage and monetize their real estate, and people need to monetize more assets for themselves, and they're kind of unique assets because they're consumer durables. So they're consumer durables who are mispriced by the marketplace. So I just basically went to my lawyer and I said, these are two things people should do. You can do it all in an app. Doing this app, it's just a matching model. So there's actually no real party in the interim. They're just providing an app, and therefore it doesn't violate any rules. And here's a legal analysis that I did. And if anybody does this, hopefully they'll remember that the idea came from me. And because at that point in time, I just was too lazy to do it myself. I'm generally too lazy to do things myself. So, you know, so about a year and a half later, 2 years later, my lawyer called me and said, you know, a couple of the VC firms that they spoke to you know, we're now going to fund this company called Uber and somebody at Airbnb, and they were going to be nice enough to giving me an allocation at the early round, so at the first round. So I just got it because somebody remembered that the idea came from me and decided to share it with me. But my whole investing philosophy, my whole life, has been to figure out why, wherever government gets involved in something and distorts a market price, how to arbitrage that. So ultimately, if we want to transform things, everything basically is an arbitrage operation. So the question is, we have to think about that type of framework. It can't just be the tech is nice, okay? We have to really understand market structure. There's a big difference between being smart and knowing how to make money. And ultimately, if you're in the business of raising money to do something, you have to learn how to make money, not just raise money. And to make money, because I get pitched a lot of ideas, and I can tell you most things I get pitched, you know, give me a headache after listening to them for a few minutes. So, because people haven't really thought through, I feel bad because I think a lot of people are really trying hard to do something meaningful. They just haven't made the investment in trying to learn enough yet prior to making the effort that they're trying to make. And I'm over my time, and I got to shut up now. So thank you very much. I need to give anybody an opportunity to ask questions. All right.